Hello, everybody. My name is Tricia Tinsley with Citizen Coach, and I'm here with my esteemed colleague and friend, Ryan Crawford. And these videos, these videos are really geared toward the mission of Citizen Coach, which is to have people realize that at any moment you could be out in the community and step into leadership. And also, as a coach, it's really important to hear that people do need support when they're doing up to big things in the community, which can be very, very challenging. And also in this day and age, it's really important for people to hear that there are people right here in our community doing really amazing, good things for the benefit of just general humankind. So I want to make sure to bring that positive message out there with these interviews. So a little bit about Ryan, just before I hand the mic over to him, so to speak, is that he actually was one of my first trainers to being a coach, and we worked together for 5 years. He's one of my most dearest and confidants, to say the least. One thing, if you don't know anything about me, if you don't know anything about Ryan, the one thing you should know is we've had some of the most honest and informative and amazing conversations. So I know that when I'm really working through things that are going on in society, or even in my own self-awareness for me, I usually talk very honestly with Ryan. So I'm really excited to have him here. And we're only going to have a short interview today, but who knows, we might do part 1 or part 2, whatever, because we definitely have some of those very interesting conversations together. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Ryan, to talk a little bit about who you are and just what you're up to in your community.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tricia, for that glowing introduction.
It's well-deserved.
Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, so I'm Ryan. A little bit about me. I am a writer in Seattle, and I write both kind of fun fiction and articles and reviews and all that good stuff. And then my day job is writing for weight loss coaching and for disease prevention curriculum. So it's kind of across the gamut, but in my role as a writer, it's a lot that pays the bills, and that also, keeps my passions alive. But in my role outside of that, I'm very involved in the community because there are other passions that need addressing, and there are real needs in the community that need to be satisfied. So I primarily focus on the LGBTQ community. I'm gay, I'm cisgender, but nobody's perfect. And I grew up in Oregon, all around Oregon, and grew up in a mostly white neighborhood, and I identify as white. And I realized that it was a very sheltering experience. And upon coming to Seattle for undergrad, I focused on a degree in creative writing. And through that coursework, I also found that I didn't know jack about the world. So there was a minor that I kind of pieced together for myself. Focusing on African-American culture, novels, music, film, and religion. They didn't recognize the African-American studies minor, but it was for my own personal benefit and for my growth. And so I focused a lot on racial justice, social justice, racial politics, and eventually my thesis was on racial representation in the American literature of queer men. And it was a really
I never knew this.
We'll talk lots about it at some point because it is partially it's really depressing, especially the older stuff.
Yeah.
And especially from white writers, where it's very objectifying and fetishizing. But of the writers of color, it's actually very profound and interesting and well represented and wonderful stuff. So we'll talk all about that someday. In my undergrad experience, I developed a really keen sense of social justice, and I've always had the personality of um, wanting to do the right thing and seeing when things were unfair and knowing that I have a responsibility as an active member of society to help correct that, to help prevent injustice, to help correct injustice, and to support people who need support.
Sure.
And part of that is very healing for myself, of course. It's, part of that is intrinsic and selfish, honestly. But also part of that is putting other people before myself, or putting the community before my own needs. Because at the end of the day, I could just stay home and play Pokemon all day long, and I'd be very content with that. But I wouldn't be satisfied in my soul.
Okay.
So my activism in particular started off in my 20s. It was a lot more focused on marriage equality for the LGBTQ community. That was a big, big mountain to climb. And in 2012, Washington State had a ballot measure, Referendum 74, to pass marriage equality by popular vote, which had not been done before in the United States.
Wow.
And yeah, and it had been done through legislature or through courts, but never through a vote, a popular vote.
Right.
So Washington and several other states were doing it all at the same time. I forget which ones. I think it was Maryland and a couple others. And this was a big deal. So in 2012, I was 26? How old was I? 27? Somewhere in there. And
Wow.
I don't know. I was younger, back in my youth. And I was, every day after work volunteering with an organization called Social Outreach Seattle, which I helped to co-direct and was part of the founding membership of that organization. It was all about developing ads and videos and leveraging content to try and persuade people to actually vote. We didn't think that we were going to change any minds, but we knew that people would be tempted not to take a stand because they didn't necessarily have to. If only gay people were voting, or only queer people in general were voting, of course we were going to lose because we're at most 10% of the population. So we needed straight allies to get off their butts and care about when they didn't have to, they really didn't. But we worked really hard. We bonded with a lot of different folks in the community and a lot of different demographics in the community. Representation was really important to us. And so we created all these videos. We worked with an amazing videographer, Drew DeNiro, and put together a ton of content. So we scheduled all these folks, we booked the shoots, and we were like up until 2 a.m. filming in bars. And it was just, it was a really hard, stressful, wonderful time.
Wow.
And that kind of lit the fire. So that was the most grassroots activism that I'd ever done. And since then, it's probably the most grassroots I've ever been. Nowadays, my activism is less, less issue specific. It's not just about marriage equality. It's kind of a macro look at, are people being treated decently?
Right.
And yes or no. And it might even behoove me to be specific again, like to try and focus my activism in a particular area or a couple. But for now, it's really focused on police brutality against men of color and the murder of trans women of color and how it's disproportionately high. So I'm in lots of marches throughout the city, lots of protests, lots of poster board. But it's important to me to show with my body and with my social media and with my voice that people care. And I'm one of those people representing this, and that there is dissent. I get in lots of Facebook fights with strangers.
I know, I've heard.
You've seen these, and it's not productive. It's not productive. And people keep on telling me, Ryan, you're not going to change any minds. And they're probably right. I'm not. And that's not necessarily the goal.
Okay.
the goal for me is just to show on this public paper trail that there is somebody who disagrees with this person. So if somebody says to me like, Colin Kaepernick should not be kneeling during the anthem, this is so disrespectful of the flag and of the NFL, and this is, why is he taking time during his job? If nobody disagrees with that publicly, then this person goes on thinking that they're correct, that nobody has any dissent, and everybody who sees that post sees, oh wow, I guess nobody's disagreeing, so I guess it's not a big deal after all. No, I'm going to disagree. I'm going to make a statement for the sake of just showing that somebody does disagree. Somebody has a different perspective, and somebody will stand up for kneeling. Get it?
Yes, I do.
That should have been part of your intro too. Ryan is also a really funny friend of yours.
Well, I figured I didn't want to color people's experience because I already know you're funny and it's going to come out at some point.
That's really sweet. I might have intimidated them if I was like introduced.
So I love this idea about going out there and putting a voice to a different perspective, because without saying I disagree, it doesn't really challenge the ideologies, right? So, I mean, this is all what learning is about, and everyone, it's funny because lately I've been struggling with this phrase, oh, I have 20 years of experience of this and this and that, when people say that to me. You know, and it's a way to say, oh, I'm an expert, or I have a lot of experience. And I'm like, yeah, but at any moment, we all need to be challenged about our ideologies, really.
Yeah.
Because it's a part of growing, and we are not in the same societies as like when I was a child. It's not the same society. We're not the same people. So anyway, I digress about you. I know that the work that you do can be really, really challenging. And I know from a personal, just some conversations, that you've really ran into some really horrible situations. So and I get from your story that you just had this intrinsic need to go out there it sounds like from an early age, to do the right thing. So what kind of support, or what do you need to actually stand and like show up and even be maybe a lone voice, especially in social media?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I find helps me the most, I've had a lot of different experiences where I've gotten the support that I need, and I didn't realize that I needed it until I got it. And I've had experiences where I knew exactly the kind of support I needed and didn't get it repeatedly, and felt kind of abandoned by that, or felt isolated and like, oh God, I'm just going to throw in the towel. There's no point. So far, now that I'm in my 30s, what I found is that in order to avoid burnout, and in order to continue to fight for things that I believe in, and to feel confident in voicing my opinions, the first thing is I need to consistently educate myself. And I can't, speaking for myself, I can't expect that I can maintain the exact opinions through the rest of my life. I need to accept that there has to be room for growth and room for education. That's very difficult to accept as a stubborn Irish.
No.
That's hard, but
I think that is for everybody. Like, even if you're humble, you know, turn around and say here to know that what? I don't know everything, or I still need to learn. Oh.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny, like the older we get, it really could be easier to get into this niche of, I know everything, I'm an elder.
Right.
And it's wonderful to see when people age and still continue to learn. So that's something I aspire to for sure, and something that I actively pursue. Another piece that I know support that I need is personally, just having a therapist really makes a big difference, knowing that I'm paying to invest in time in myself with somebody who's way smarter than I am and way more intellectually and emotionally in tune, but with zero bias, with no skin in the game. And they can just listen and share with me. They kind of help me filter my own thoughts, or help me like decode my own thoughts, because this up here gets so jumbled sometimes.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference. But it's also important to have friends who are biased and who do have skin in the game. For me, it's important to hear that someone agrees with me once in a while, that all they have to do is say, God, yeah, like that's ridiculous. That should never have happened. Oh my God, like this is ridiculous. Or yeah, like this is on fire. Like this is a big dumpster fire. Or vice versa. Like, yeah, that was really amazing. And, you know, I totally agree with you. Just that base level tribal, we are one, we are in sync. I'm not alone in this, despite seeing what feels like overwhelming opposition, that the administration is really okay with this. The educational department is really okay with this on a federal level. Like this doesn't make any sense. So it is vastly helpful to have that too. Also, like on a physical level, it's important for me to take care of my health and for my body to feel like it's up for the fight, like it's equipped for it. And so I notice that on days when I'm not eating well, or weeks that I'm not eating well, or not active, or not hydrated, it's a lot easier to get into kind of a doom and gloom space and to want to give up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, because, you know, in order to show up mentally, you have to show up physically too. Like your body is a big part of that. So
totally.
Being fit does help.
Yes. Whiskey does too, a little.
What did you say?
I said whiskey does too.
Oh, I wouldn't know anything about that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So yes, I do believe that a good shot of whiskey after a long night is one of the best things.
Sometimes.
And you know, I travel a lot for work, and so getting on a plane and like showing up physically and doing all that, I just was like, oh, I've got to keep all of this. Like I have to honor my body above all else to do this work.
Yeah.
So I know that we have not too much time left, so I want to get in a couple questions.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate your insight about kind of what you need to be able to do the work you do. So one of the things that I was going to ask, but now it occurred to me after listening to you that we could open up to a bigger question. And it really is like, what are some of the issues that may not be so obvious to people who are not in the LGBTQ community? Some of the issues that are really important. But when I'm listening to you, I notice that it could just be also, what do you think are some of the issues in the community that are the most important? So I'll leave it up to you to how you want to answer that.
Great. Yeah, these are really important questions. For those folks who see this and do not identify within the LGBTQ community, at the very least, you know at this point that queer people need basic rights. We need to be able to go to work and not worry that we're going to be fired for our job, for being gay, or for being trans, or whatever queer facet we're representing.
Sure.
We need to be able to apply for homes. We need to be able to have equal adoption rights. Gay men need to be able to donate blood without having to be sexually celibate for 12 months concurrently.
Yeah, that one.
There's basic things that don't make any logical sense and are still there on paper as law for some reason that just makes it legal for people like me to be treated worse than other people. And that doesn't make sense. I'm a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen who is a productive member of society. I shouldn't have to be treated like a second-class citizen. And nobody should. what folks may not know outside of the queer community is that there are significant health issues that face sexual minorities and gender minorities, because there is so much stress in the process. For racial minorities, there's tons of stress. For biological sex minorities, for people who are born female, there is a lot of social stress that goes into this too, and even physical stress. But these are things that you are told upon birth. This is who you are. Welcome to this community. You're a part of the sisterhood, or you're a part of the brotherhood, or you're part of this group. And life is going to be really hard, but chances are your entire family looks like you, or chances are your entire faith community practices the same religion that you've been raised to practice.
Right.
There's all these social networks built in. For sexual minorities, that's most often not the case. The rule versus the exception. The rule is that we're born kind of to discover it on our own, and through the process of childhood and puberty, it's up to us to discover for ourselves what our sexual orientations are, where we fall in a spectrum, and then constantly over time to develop a deeper understanding of that, and through experience and through thought to kind of get to know ourselves a little bit better. But then we're expected to represent it to the rest of the world. Yesterday was National Coming Out Day, October 11th.
Yep.
And I thought, it's funny how straight people don't have to do this, but it's an important part for queer folks to have that moment in our identity when we come out for the first time, or to the most important people in our lives. And we don't necessarily have a built-in community. We have to find it. And so through that process, we do have a lot of struggle, physical health issues, mental health issues, social health issues, and some struggles with addiction. Queer folks, there was a study published by the National, what are they called? National LGBTQ Tobacco Research Council, I think. I think they're based in the Midwest, but it's some title like that. But the study was that queer folks are 50 to 200% more likely to smoke tobacco than the general population. And that is devastating to our health. But LGBTQ folks don't even necessarily know that stat, and may not even be able to speak to it. But when you have tobacco industries advertising in queer publications, or coasters with, camel logos that are in our bars, these are spaces that we go to feel comfortable, and conversations that we start over substances, like, can I buy you a drink? Or do you have a light? Oh, maybe this will be the first connection I have in the queer community, or maybe this is the love of my life, or maybe this is just, some fun for today.
Right. But
these kinds of chemical experiences find their way into our social experiences. And as we're joking about whiskey, like, there can be those days where, of course, like, chemicals are fun, but then there's also those situations where it becomes an addiction issue, and that actually is very serious and affects the queer community pretty strongly. What queer folks who might be watching this hopefully know already, and if they don't, they really need to, is that racism still runs very rampant, and misogyny still runs very rampant within the queer community. Yeah. And this is something that that really divides folks. And the frustration I have is when people don't just recognize fact, or don't just empathize with folks and put themselves in somebody else's situation, and instead defend their own use of racist language, or their own use of misogynistic language, for the sake of not being called out, or the sake of not being wrong. Yeah. When in fact, all they have to say is, wow, you're right, I shouldn't say that anymore, and move on from that. Right. Yeah.
And this is a conversation I would love to have later, because one of the things that happens in the Black community is we're always having conversations, not always easy, and they're not really blatant, or even people don't want to bring it up, is that within our community, we have this misogyny and even like color divide. There's like huge division. But the the flip side of that, and again, I'll make my point and finish it up, but we should have a conversation about this later, is that this also is good news, right? Because then you see that a lot, just generally, people struggle with their own sense of like bias, right? Across the board, which can be, on one hand, unifying. You know, like it's one thing that we can speak the same language. Like, yeah, I struggle with like the color complex. This is something that I can share with anybody, and I identify as straight, right? So, but there's a lot of people who are queer and all light skin or dark skin. There's like, I can relate on that level, you know? So this is something that I've been also thinking about too. And clearly this is where our relationship will start to show itself on this videos, because we get into these kind of conversations, but I'll leave it be for a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking. I learned a lot because I didn't know about some of those statistics. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I also didn't know that you had done the work with the ad campaigns for. Yeah, so that was really exciting, and I will be following up with that later.
Nice.
So I have the last question for you, and you can take all the time you need. And I want to preface this question by saying I thought about it really hard. And I take this very seriously. So one, you know, the two things that I love in this world are werewolves and Barack Obama. I'm just like,
I love where this is going so far.
You may not know, it may be a curveball, you may see where this is going. And you know, where there are werewolves, there are vampires.
Yes.
So in the vampire werewolf world, where do you think Barack Obama would fall, and why?
Like, which one would he be?
Yes. And this is very serious, so, because he may be watching. And also, if he is watching, you can take this opportunity to say whatever you need to say to him.
Okay, well, Barack, first of all, I miss you. I can't even get into it without getting emotional. Like, I miss you. Do I think you're unbelievable? Barack Obama seems like an introvert, right? He seems pretty reserved. So part of me, I guess, correlates that to vampirism, because vampires spend half of their lives just, you know, cloistered in coffins, allegedly.
Right.
If that's like, if we accept that lore. If we're in like the Anne Rice category, that's what we're believing.
Right, if we accept that lore.
If we're in the Stephanie Meyer, it's all different.
I know.
Barack Obama. But here's the thing, with vampires, it's like they have this moral quandary. Well, maybe that's accurate. Of like, they have to feed on other people, so they're taking human lives in order to sustain their own vampire life. And I don't know, but with werewolves, there's just this facet of like, I can't control myself.
Right.
There's something like this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation where a side of myself is perhaps unlovable, is perhaps a monster. Oh my God, like we could write a thesis on this. I think he'd be a werewolf. I think he keeps it prim and proper for the public, but Michelle could give us some stories.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'm glad you chose that, because that is the right answer.
I didn't realize I was
For me, if there was anything that were to be true in this world that I wished for. Yeah, and also as a werewolf, you know, if you accept the lore that you can only change in the moonlight, you can always chain yourself up. You're like, I know this is coming, you know. I don't need to like go out and attack people to live, unlike vampires. I can just like chill out till the moon goes away. Anyway, so yeah, I take that question very seriously.
I can see why. It is.
Ryan, thank you. I love you. I'm so glad you're out there fighting the good fight. And again, I really appreciate you doing this.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I love you too. And I'll leave you with this.
Okay.
Nowadays, we have so much negative stuff and we have so many things to fight for and to fight against. And that takes energy and vitriol. And it's so important to keep those things up too. Recently, as we're discussing activism, I've found that one way that actually really energizes my activism is to focus on the wonderful things that are happening
Yes.
for the queer community, for communities of color, for women, for religious minorities, or atheists. It helps to be able to write, like I do film reviews for queer films, and I do event promotions for queer events that are coming up, or I write articles for like just fun, hokey articles about like how queer people are represented through Pokemon. Like it's all fun stuff. And it still keeps things in the forefront. It still represents folks in a positive and multifaceted way. And it also amplifies the platform of folks who are trying really hard to develop beautiful art or to put on important events. And that's a wonderful way that we can still show our activism through uniting and through supporting each other. And it doesn't always have to, I'm just reminding myself as much as I'm saying this on video. It's like me talking to myself basically, but we can do those things to refuel our spirits as much as those things that require a lot of spirit and can sometimes damper our spirits when it actually requires fight.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for saying that, because that is really important. So take care of yourself. I'm going to actually stop the recording, but you can stay on the line if you want.
Okay, sounds good.